ancient spiritual teachings on consciousness and unity. In our first exploration, we ventured into the bewildering landscape of quantum physics, discovering that the fundamental building blocks of the universe behave in ways that defy our everyday experience. We saw particles that act like waves, exist in multiple states at once, and remain mysteriously connected across vast distances. This scientific journey revealed a reality far more fluid, probabilistic, and interconnected than the solid, predictable world of classical physics. It left us with profound questions about the nature of reality, the role of observation, and the possibility of a universe that is, at its core, a unified whole rather than a collection of separate parts. Now we turn our gaze from the cutting edge of modern science to the deep well of ancient human wisdom. For millennia, across diverse cultures and continents, spiritual seekers, mystics, and philosophers have contemplated these same fundamental questions about existence, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos, working not with particle accelerators and mathematical equations, but with introspection, contemplation, meditation, and direct intuitive experience. Many of these traditions arrived at worldviews that, surprisingly, seem to echo some of the very strange features we find in the quantum realm. In this episode, Echoes of Oneness, Wisdom from Ancient Traditions, we will explore some key spiritual philosophies that place consciousness and interconnectedness at the heart of their understanding of reality. We'll look at insights from traditions like Vedanta, Buddhism, and various forms of mysticism, highlighting the themes that will become particularly relevant when we compare them to quantum physics in our next episode. Our goal here is to understand how these ancient paths describe the fundamental nature of being and the intricate web that connects all things. Consciousness as fundamental. In the Western scientific tradition, particularly over the last few centuries, consciousness has often been viewed as an emergent property of complex matter, primarily the brain. It is seen as something produced by physical processes. However, many ancient spiritual traditions hold a radically different view. For them, consciousness is not something that arises from matter. Rather, consciousness is fundamental. It is the ground of being, the source from which everything else arises, or perhaps even is everything else. This universal, primary consciousness is given different names across traditions: Brahman, the Tao, the Absolute, God, Allah, universal mind, or simply awareness. Whatever the name, the core idea is that consciousness is not limited to individual beings, but is an all-pervading reality, an infinite ocean of awareness in which all apparently separate things are merely ripples or waves. Our individual minds are seen as localized expressions or reflections of this one universal consciousness. Understanding this foundational difference in the view of consciousness, from a product of the brain to the fundamental reality, is crucial for appreciating the parallels we will explore. Vedanta, all is Brahman. One of the most profound expressions of this consciousness-centric and non-dual worldview comes from Vedanta, a philosophical tradition originating in ancient India, based on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. The central tenet of Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, is Brahman Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. Brahman alone is real, the world is unreal or illusory, and the individual self, Jiva, is not different from Brahman. Let's break this down. Brahman is the ultimate reality, infinite, eternal, unchanging, and pure consciousness. It is the source and substance of everything, yet it transcends all descriptions and limitations. It is existence, consciousness, and bliss, Sat Chidananda. Atman is the individual self, the soul within each being. The revolutionary insight of Vedanta is captured in the Mahavakya, or great sayings, such as Tat Tvamasi, thou art that. This isn't just a philosophical statement, it's an assertion of identity. Your deepest self, the Atman, is not separate from the ultimate reality, Brahman. The individual soul is not a part of God or created by God in a separate act. It is God. It is the universal consciousness. If Brahman is the only reality and Atman is Brahman, then what about the world we perceive with all its apparent diversity and separation? This is where the concept of Maya comes in. Maya is often translated as illusion, but it's perhaps better understood as the power of Brahman to create the appearance of a separate material world with individual objects and beings. It's like a magician's trick or a dream. It seems real while you are in it, but it obscures the underlying reality. Maya creates the illusion of duality and multiplicity where only non-dual unity exists. Our perception of ourselves as separate individuals in a separate world is part of this cosmic illusion. The goal of spiritual practice in Vedanta is to see through Maya, to realize the identity of Atman and Brahman, and experience the non-dual reality directly. This realization isn't about becoming one with God. It's about realizing that you were never separate in the first place. This philosophy posits a radical interconnectedness rooted in a single unified conscious reality. Buddhism, interconnectedness, and no self. While Buddhism originated from the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, who lived after the early Upanishads were composed and offered a different path that initially sidestepped metaphysical speculation, many later Buddhist traditions, particularly Mahayana and Vajrayana, developed sophisticated philosophies that resonate strongly with themes of interconnectedness and the nature of reality as non-dual or empty of inherent independent existence. A core Buddhist teaching is anatta or anatman, often translated as no self or non-self. This is not a claim that you don't exist, but rather that there is no permanent, unchanging, independent self or soul in the way conceived by some other traditions. What we call the self is seen as a temporary aggregation of physical and mental components, the five skandhas, constantly changing and interdependent. This understanding undermines the strong sense of a separate, independent ego that is the source of much suffering. Instead of independent existence, Buddhism emphasizes dependent origination, pratitya samutpada. This doctrine states that all phenomena arise in dependence upon other phenomena. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is interconnected in a vast web of cause and effect. Our experiences, our thoughts, our very existence depend on a myriad of factors that are themselves dependent on other factors. This understanding of reality as fundamentally interdependent challenges the notion of discrete, independent things existing on their own. Furthermore, Mahayana Buddhism developed the concept of shunyata, emptiness, which asserts that phenomena are empty of inherent, self-sufficient existence. They do not possess an unchangeable essence or nature. This emptiness doesn't mean nothing exists. It means nothing exists independently or permanently. Everything is relational and arises from conditions. This view, like Vedanta's Maya, suggests that our perception of solid, separate, independently existing objects is not the ultimate truth of how things are. Some schools also teach Buddha nature, the inherent potential for enlightenment within all sentient beings, which can be interpreted as a shared fundamental nature or consciousness. While the philosophical language differs significantly from Vedanta, Buddhism often avoids the concept of a singular, universal consciousness in the same way. The emphasis on the lack of inherent, separate existence and the radical interconnectedness of all things provides fertile ground for comparison. Mysticism across traditions. Beyond specific philosophical schools, the thread of interconnectedness and unity runs through mystical experiences reported across nearly all spiritual traditions: Christian mysticism, Sufism, Islamic mysticism, Jewish Kabbalah, Taoism, and many indigenous spiritualities. While the theological frameworks and language used to describe these experiences vary, there is a remarkable commonality in the nature of the mystical state itself. Mystics often describe a direct, intuitive, non-conceptual experience of unity with the divine, with the universe, or with all of existence. In this state, the ordinary sense of a separate individual self dissolves. The boundaries between me and not me, between inside and outside, seem to disappear. The mystic feels profoundly connected to everything, perceiving the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a seamless, living whole. They speak of experiencing a single reality or consciousness underlying all apparent diversity. Think of quotes from Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart: "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." Or Sufi poets like Rumi: "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." These expressions point towards a realization of non-duality, a transcendence of the subject-object distinction, and a direct apprehension of a unified ground of being. While their interpretations are framed within their specific religious contexts, the core experience of interconnectedness and the dissolution of the separate self is a powerful recurring theme in mysticism globally. It represents a mode of knowing reality that is different from the analytical, separative mode common in everyday life and classical science. Common threads of unity and non-duality. Looking across these diverse ancient traditions, several powerful themes emerge that resonate with each other and seem to point towards a similar understanding of reality, arrived at through millennia of contemplation and experiential practice. Firstly, there is a strong emphasis on interconnectedness. Whether it's the non-duality of Atman and Brahman, the dependent origination of all phenomena, or the mystical experience of unity, These traditions converge on the idea that separation is, in some fundamental sense, an illusion. Everything is part of a larger whole, intimately related and interdependent. Secondly, they point towards a reality that is non-dual, meaning not characterized by fundamental oppositions like subject, object, mind, matter, or self-other. The ultimate reality is often described as a unified field of consciousness or being, beyond these conceptual divisions. Thirdly, consciousness is often viewed as fundamental to reality, not merely a byproduct. It is seen as the ground from which everything arises, or the very fabric of existence itself. This stands in stark contrast to purely materialistic worldviews. Finally, these traditions often highlight that our ordinary perception of a world of separate, independently existing objects is not the ultimate truth, Maya, emptiness. There is a deeper reality, a unified source or nature that is obscured by our conventional ways of seeing and thinking. Echoes of the quantum realm. As we reflect on these ancient insights, a fascinating question begins to arise. Do these spiritual concepts of interconnectedness, non-duality, and the fluid nature of perceived reality sound familiar? Do they perhaps echo some of the strange behaviors we observed in the quantum realm? The interconnectedness of entangled particles, the probabilistic nature of reality before measurement, the observer seemingly influencing the observed. Could it be that these two vastly different modes of inquiry, scientific investigation and spiritual contemplation, are, from different angles and using different languages, pointing towards similar features of the universe at its most fundamental level? Are the ancient mystics and the modern quantum physicists catching glimpses of the same underlying reality, albeit through very different lenses? We have now glimpsed the counterintuitive nature of the quantum world and explored ancient wisdom traditions that emphasize unity and consciousness. We have the two pieces on the table. The stage is set for a remarkable comparison. Conclusion. In this episode, we have journeyed through some of the rich landscapes of ancient spiritual thought, uncovering profound ideas about the nature of consciousness, the illusion of separation, and the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. From the non-dual realization of Vedanta to the interdependent web of Buddhism and the unifying experiences of mystics, a consistent theme emerges. The universe is, at its core, a unified conscious reality, and our perception of ourselves as separate individuals in a separate world is not the whole story. These ancient insights provide a compelling perspective that contrasts sharply with the materialistic, fragmented view of reality, often associated with a purely classical scientific paradigm. They offer a vision of a universe brimming with meaning and interconnectedness, a universe in which consciousness plays a central role. Having now explored both the strange foundations of quantum physics and these powerful spiritual concepts, we are perfectly positioned to undertake the most exciting part of our journey, directly comparing the two and exploring the striking parallels that suggest a potential convergence between science and spirit. That is the adventure that awaits us in the next episode.